All right, good morning, everybody. This is Jason Flame, host of the Master Motivation Podcast. And today, on this Friday, March 31st, 2023, I am very excited to have this guest on the show. And let me introduce him really quick. This is Pat Miletich. He's a retired American mixed martial artist and former sports commentator. He's known for his fights in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, where he became the first UFC welterweight champion and UFC 16 welterweight tournament winner. Miletich is also known as a highly successful trainer and coach, having founded Miletich Fighting Systems. His camp is considered one of the most successful in MMA history and has produced several world champions. On July 6, 2014, he was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. So welcome to the show, sir, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Listen, this is, we had this scheduled, and then we had, some moving things around. And I know that you took time out of your day to be here for me today. So again, super excited to interview you and just talk about your life, your history with the UFC, coaching, and everything that you've got going on now and moving forward. So really quick, if you can introduce yourself a little bit more in detail to those that are watching the show that may not have ever watched UFC or know who you are or what you do. Take a minute just to expand on your background.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Bettendorf, Iowa, still live here. And of course, Bettendorf, and while being in Iowa, the bad wrestlers go out for the basketball team, so to speak. So I went out for wrestling in kindergarten. I got beat up by the middle school wrestling coach's son in kindergarten, and I figured I didn't like that very much, so I better go out for wrestling, be able to take care of myself. And I wrestled and played football my entire life here. And Bettendorf is a hotbed, kind of a conveyor belt for very good athletes. And so it was a good breeding ground for me. I got beat up a lot in junior high and high school, of course, by my teammates. A lot of incredible wrestlers come out of this area. And so it toughened me up quite a bit. But left college early. I was in college, and my mother got heart problems, and so I ended up going home and working 3 jobs, pouring concrete, and then bartending and bouncing at night to try and help pay bills a little bit for her. And I don't think college was really something that I was really not. The vibration didn't suit me. I was a little bit different, probably cut out of a different rug, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So. One day when I was pouring concrete, one of my foremen, finisher, who was from Kentucky, good old boy from Kentucky, was bragging how a karate man, because he was a black belt in karate, could beat up a wrestler. And this is long before the UFC. I mean, a long time before the UFC, late 80s, right in that area. And I laughed at him and I said, apparently you haven't been grabbed by an Iowa wrestler. You might want to reconsider that. And he said, well, at lunchtime we can go out in the field and we can find out. And I said, okay, well, that's fine with me. And so we went out there and I threw him around a little bit. I didn't hurt him or anything. And he gave me a free pass to go to his karate gym and kickboxing gym. So I went there for a week. And I wasn't overly impressed at the time because I had boxed some at a really, really high-level boxing gym as a teenager. And I wasn't overly impressed with the katas and the traditional stuff at that time. I expected it to be a little bit different. But on Friday, after my last lesson, they said, hey, the black belts are coming in. They spar on Friday nights. You want to stick around and watch? And I thought, yeah, I'll check this out. So I watched them spar, and it was a Shorei-ryu karate, which is an Okinawan style, a hard style of karate, and they were getting after it. I mean, these guys could fight. And so I said, you know what? Now I get it. Yeah, I'm signing up. So I signed up to get a black belt, and of course I got a 4th degree black belt there. And started kickboxing, doing all of that, and fought K1 rules, won a U.S. title in that. And then the UFC came along, and I was already doing some judo and sambo and some other stuff at the time. And I thought, wow, they just literally created my sport. They just invented my sport. It was made for me. So that's kind of how it all kind of went down.
Wow. What a great background and history lesson. There's a lot of people watching here that do remember, watching you fight in the UFC and then, of course, watching all the fighters that you produced throughout the UFC. But what I loved hearing about, wrestling, right? My son wrestled in high school. He's a senior now, so he just finished. Okay. Had a couple injuries here and there, which always sucks. But man, I'll tell you what. One thing that I love is that he's been a martial artist since he was, 2.5 years old, having run a martial arts school myself.
Sure.
And so getting him involved in wrestling was one of the best things we ever did, because the work ethic that he learned coming out of wrestling camps, and he did a camp with Mark Munoz. He did a couple seminars here and there in addition to his his high school training, and I think it just really took his whole training to a different level. It just made him see things different. So it doesn't surprise me when you said you kind of checked out a karate school, and maybe it was just the wrong one at the wrong time, or a karate guy that didn't have all the right stuff. But how different it can be, and how grueling wrestling training can be. But you come from like you said, you come from a background in an area of high level wrestlers. Tell me a little bit more about what that means, and why you think that area brought out such high level wrestlers.
Well, I think the tradition in Iowa, certainly Dan Gable helped with that, winning 3 NCAA titles and an Olympic gold, and not being scored upon by anybody in the Olympics, which is incredible in itself. But, we don't have mountains here. There aren't winter sports, so to speak. Hockey was never big here. Mm-hmm. So, you have to think about the blue collar and farming industries and lifestyle that, you work all summer long, spring, summer and fall, and then, work on equipment during the winter, things like that, basically get everything ready for spring again. But for the most part, that's downtime. And with no mountains, no winter sports, so to speak, everybody goes indoors and starts throwing each other around, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of lent itself, the lifestyle lent itself to creating, great wrestlers. And of course, people who grow up eating organically rich food out of the soil, fresh food, are much stronger than people who eat food out of boxes and that type of lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a very, very obvious difference for me. I mean, I've, in my prime anyway, once I learned how to heal myself from disease, I had a severe respiratory disease my entire childhood from black mold. It damaged my respiratory system severely. But once I healed myself and was in my prime, I mean, I was weighing 185 pounds. I was, running a 4.40, could run 16.5-minute 5Ks, could dunk a basketball, and was bench pressing 370 pounds. And that still wasn't even remotely enough to deal with a lot of the guys that I, had trained with growing up, and when I was the UFC champ, I remember an interview where a guy asked me, what's it like to be one of the toughest guys on the planet? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about, because I'm about number 30 in my hometown of 35,000 people here in Iowa. I mean, there's some really, really scary, very powerful individuals that come out of this area. So, that's the thing that I tell people, is that the beatings I took growing up is what prepared me to give everybody else beatings in the octagon, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you worked 3 jobs coming up. You worked concrete. I come from a background that my father was in construction. I remember working on jobs with him and being out there, and just like you said, that lifestyle of just hard work. Of course, here I am. I'm in California, so life is a little different in California than it is in Iowa. I'm just guessing, right? But right. But knowing what it was like to be on the jobs and to do hard work, to do to work a labor intensive job. Did you have any aspirations of furthering that career, or what were your goals when you were in high school, moving on towards college? What were your goals then?
I went to school for marketing and advertising. I had a more of an artistic mindset. I was very good with drawing and painting, and mm-hmm. I understood the concept of demographics and who to aim advertising at, and a lot of that sort of stuff. So that's what I was into. Was definitely the more artistic side of things, but I think that lent itself to being a mixed martial artist, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to conceptualize and visualize yourself being able to do things before you can do them, right? So that's something that I was very good at, was visualization, and I guess almost hypnotizing myself into the point of that I could win a world title. Mm-hmm. And so that's really kind of what it came down to. But for the most part, in high school, I mean, I came real close to, and I don't say this like for any other reason than I should have. It probably would have helped me a lot more in life early on. I should have gone into the military, to be honest with you. I was actually even considering I was going to go play football for my father, who was a college football coach. I was a pretty good football player, and he got cancer and passed away. And so I was kind of at that point in life, I had no direction whatsoever. So it was, I guess everything happens by design with my mother getting sick and kind of setting me on the road to, accomplishing a mission that I certainly didn't set out to accomplish early on.
Mm-hmm. Now, so in high school, you played several sports, right? And then you went on to college. Where'd you go to college?
I went to Kirkwood in Cedar Rapids.
And so you studied marketing and advertising, but as far as sports, did you play sports in college as well?
Yeah, I was wrestling. Yeah. So that was the thing is, it was interesting. Sports in high school, I'll be honest with you, sports kept me in high school because I was so bored with what we were doing in high school. I just saw no reason for it because, my brother left school when he was 16 and became a multimillionaire by the time he was 22, 23 years old. And I thought, I can do the same thing. It's just that when you're young, you're dumb. You don't, you're not thinking clearly, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you wrestled in college and what happened in college and how did that take you to the next level?
Well, that was the thing. When my mother got sick early on with everything, I had to leave. So
Okay.
that's why I left. And so I still wanted to compete, obviously. And, I was just working the 3 jobs. I didn't really have any time to do anything, but by happenstance, having that conversation and the situation with the guy that was a karate black belt,
Mm-hmm.
and ending up in that karate school and kickboxing gym was, God's plan, right?
Right. And did that led you to your mixed martial arts career when
Yeah,
you started
yeah,
fighting, you fought
yeah.
K1 so what was first? Give me the timeline of how you progressed from that martial arts school.
I started out, of course, got my black belt in karate and was doing kickboxing, amateur kickboxing, and then turned pro, won a U.S. title in that. And, I was, of course, being a wrestler was always, we mixed wrestling in with kickboxing with everything already long before the UFC. So we were doing, judo, sambo, wrestling, a lot of different stuff in that gym. And then got to a point where the training just didn't make sense to me at that facility. And so I went and I started my own. That's when I started Miletich Fighting Systems, where I wanted to train like a wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't know how to train like wrestlers that were in the, the karate world, so to speak, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right.
So that's when I went and I rented a racquetball court at a fitness facility, and we put wrestling mats on the floors and the walls. And that's kind of how it all got started. I called it my battle box, and off we went.
And what year was this?
Oh, you expect me to remember the years? I don't keep track. I don't keep track of any of that. I mean, it was early 90s.
Early 90s. Okay, cool. And of course, the UFC started in 93.
Yeah,
93.
Yeah.
So what from training and starting to train, your own students and having your own training system, what kind of concepts and what kind of things did you go in with? Obviously, with the wrestling background and incorporating that, but what were ultimately your goals and why did you want to create your own system?
Well, it was I think more than anything else, my observations of martial arts were very similar to almost religion, so to speak, where martial artists clung to their style, even if it would get them killed. Where they would not. They were so ingrained in one style in those days that traditional martial artists would stop by my gym. Back in the day when there was a lot of dojo busting going on, and so guys would roll into my gym. Black belts in taekwondo, karate, kung fu, judo guys, different styles would show up, and they would say, "We want to fight the toughest people here," and we'd get it on. There was no rules besides the eye gouging and no biting, things like that, no groin strikes, and so that stuff was going on a lot. It was the Wild West back then. People who were just driving across the country would stop in for a fight. Yeah. it was bizarre. But one thing that I recognized is people being so ingrained and so their whole entire being was connected to one style. When I recognized very early on that being that way left a lot of holes in your style, and I said to myself, I would rather be well-rounded and decent at everything than an expert at one thing, because being an expert at one thing is not sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, when the UFC started, that was kind of the premise in a lot of ways, is that they would pit the karate against a judo fighter, or the wrestler against a kickboxer, and that was kind of how it started. What was your involvement, or how were you involved in the early years of the UFC?
The of course I watched UFC 1 and was very intrigued by it, but the first UFC that I actually attended was UFC 9 at Cobo Arena in Detroit, Michigan. I was asked to go up there and work out that entire week leading up to the fights with Amri Batesh, who was the #1 jiu-jitsu guy in the world at the time. He was the premier guy. He was amazing on the ground. He was fighting Don Fry in that event, and Omri was nowhere near big enough to be fighting Don Fry. I mean, Don Fry is a very big guy and a very powerful wrestler. It's a very tough guy. And in those days, him in his prime's pretty scary dude. But he and Omri fought that night, and I'd never seen anyone take a beating like that in my life. Omri, I thought I was witnessing a murder.
Wow.
And the entire crowd was going nuts, of course, for the American. But you could hear Omri's girlfriend screaming his name over the top of the entire crowd in Cobo Arena, which was going nuts. It was kind of blood curdling, to be honest with you, how terrified she was to witness this. And Alan Goez, who was in his corner, and then Osvaldo Alves weren't throwing in the towel. And I was yelling at Alan Goez. I'm like, dude, you got to throw the towel in. He's being killed right now. And they wouldn't throw in the towel. And John McCarthy stopped the fight 2 different times and had the doctor come in and check Omri. And Omri didn't speak English. All he knew was to say more. So when John McCarthy said, "Do you want to continue?" Omri looked at him and said, "More." And so he'd start him up again, and Omri'd march right back in there, throwing bombs at Don. And yeah, so that was my first experience with UFC. And then I eventually fought in the UFC. It was in the tournament in New Orleans. UFC 16 was my first event.
Now, what were your thoughts when you started to see the UFC being formed? Then of course you attended the event, on to being involved in what were your thoughts going into the whole thing?
That I was going to win a world title, that I was going to be the UFC champ eventually, and that that was the goal. I wasn't in it to compete. I was in it to win the title.
Yeah.
I was all in at that point. So it was exciting. I mean, I had 20, I think I was 20-1 at the time when I went into the UFC. So I had quite a few fights under my belt by the time I got in.
And talk about how you've watched the UFC evolve since the beginning to what it is now.
Of course, at some point, we knew that it was going to take people with a lot of money and a lot of power to be able to take it to the next level. But I called it back in those days. I said, you can see the vultures circling. The vultures are circling because, they knew that there was a lot of money involved in this sport eventually. And so, big business getting involved. But I mean, to be honest with you, the contracts haven't really changed that much. If anything, they've become even more predatory. I think that fighters are so locked down, with stipulations and not being able to have sponsors, and a lot of other things like that. I think it's a little bit too controlling, and that there needs to be as much competition as possible. Other organizations with a lot of money to give fighters options.
Do you think that that's possible?
I think it is possible. It just comes down to, look, the group that bought the UFC, very powerful group. They've got billions, so it's going to take a very, very wealthy group of individuals, and I think ONE FC does a good job. I think ONE FC is a very, very good organization as well. certainly they control a lot of the Asian market and things like that. But so there's a little bit of balance there, but the UFC is certainly at the top.
Yeah. Now, as far as the style and the talent and the just the different athletes that have come through the UFC, again, in the beginning, it was very, traditional martial artists, kickboxers, wrestlers. Obviously, we've seen a huge change where, everybody is cross trained. Everybody is working in all areas. Did you see that progression happening? And when do you think that was it really started to shift?
Well, I think that shifted, of course, when I was in there. We were training, everything. I mean, we had world-class boxers in our gym. We had world-class kickboxers, world-class wrestlers. We had a lot of people that were all cross-training, in those days. And so that stuff was already going on, of course. But what I notice when I put on my coach's hat or my broadcaster's hat and I observe the fights, there's still a lot of really bad footwork, really bad head movement, really bad defense. A lot of skills that are not. I see a lot of mixed martial artists training with a lot of mixed martial artists instead of going. A wrestler like myself had to go to a boxing gym and spend years there sparring with world class and like Michael Nunn, who was the best pound for pound boxer in the world at the time. As a wrestler sparring with a guy like that, that's how you learn. That's how you truly learn footwork and head movement and defense. And you learn, for guys that are better at striking, immersing themselves in the, in the summer especially, we'd go up to the Iowa wrestling room and train with the Iowa wrestling team, with the Hawk Club guys, the international ladder guys, things like that. So, and then jiu-jitsu, Amri Bateshas of the world and Arturo Mariana Souza's and all those guys would come and live at my house and train with us for fights. And those are the best jiu-jitsu guys walking the planet, so that's the type of stuff that you have to have.
Right.
And so I don't see a lot of mixed martial artists doing the same thing. Again, go spend 6, 8, 10 weeks sparring with the best boxers in the world and get your face, where you eat enough leather to shoe the Italian army. That's how you learn.
Right. Right. Quick shout out. Thank you, Gabby. Gabby's watching. Appreciate you being here today. Let me know if you have any questions for Mr. Miletich, and I'll be happy to ask. If you're watching live, guys, please drop any comments or any questions that you have so I can use those as we go forward. Another question I have for you is for those that are, casual fans or people that really have no idea of martial arts at all. Describe and explain, your views and the differences between wrestling and jiu-jitsu.
Of course, a lot of best way to explain it, I would use a key lock in wrestling to put somebody on their back and get back points. Obviously in jiu-jitsu, you're using a key lock, shoulder lock, kimura, whatever you want to call it, to, dislocate the shoulder if they don't give up. There's a lot of the same techniques, to be honest with you, besides the actual chokes and arm bars and things like that. But a lot of the concepts are similar, except when you get to the jiu-jitsu where, being able to fight off your back because, you don't want to expose your back to somebody that's good at choking, things like that. Jiu-jitsu is more of, especially sport jiu-jitsu, is more playing. Of course, the goal is to eventually submit someone. Where wrestling is a much more explosive, power-based sport and combat sport, so to speak. Wrestlers are generally, for the most part, much more explosive, much stronger, much faster, much meaner, and much more punishing than jiu-jitsu is. And the nice thing about jiu-jitsu is it's a lot like golf. Everybody can do it. You really can. Everybody can put a gi on and everybody can learn jiu-jitsu. And there's a lot of people out there who aren't athletic who will absolutely tie you up like a mummy in a gi and choke you unconscious. That does not exist in wrestling. The best wrestlers in the world are going to run through everyone on the planet. So there's just a lot of differences. I think that jiu-jitsu's incredible. Of course, I've done it since 92, 93 in that area. So it's something that I love, but to me, it's all kind of because I've done so many martial arts and combative sports that it's become one for me in my mind. There's nothing that stands out by itself.
Mm-hmm. Who are the top wrestlers in your mind? And you might have to divide that into categories, but who would you say were the top wrestlers?
Well, I mean, the guy that lost in the semifinals in the NCAAs from the University of Iowa, Spencer Lee, he was 3-time NCAA champion, was absolutely destroying the best guys in the country and in the world. And he got caught. He got caught in the semis in the NCAAs and got pinned. And massive upset. But that's wrestling. That's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts being a wrestler, wrestlers turning to pro wrestling? Brock Lesnar, Kurt Angle, Shelton Benjamin.
I think it's great. Go make a lot of money. The interesting thing is the history of pro wrestling, where it used to be catch as catch can. The Farmer Burns and the Gotch and Earl Lederman's against the Terrible Turks at the Minnesota and Iowa State fairs, things like that. Those matches were in front of 80,000 people. They'd last for 3 hours. Those guys would go at it. And what they found was that if they spiced it up a little bit and did some theatrics, that the crowd became a lot more interested. And that's kind of how pro wrestling started, back in the day. I don't know if you remember guys like Vern Gagne and some of those guys. Yeah. So, but I'm more of into the history of everything. I can appreciate the history of how it evolved and all of that. So I'm all for the pro wrestling stuff.
Great. And now let's talk about some of the fighters that you've had the privilege to train and to work with. Name some of the guys that you've trained, again, for those that are watching that don't know your team and people. Who have you trained and what has their success level been?
Well, I think overall we put 95 or so athletes into televised careers, had 12 world champs in different organizations. Matt Hughes, Tim Sylvia, Jens Pulver, Robbie Lawler, trained Mark Coleman when he asked me to train him, and he had lost a couple fights in a row, dropped out of the top 10 in the world, and then so he came to Iowa. I trained him. He won the Pride Grand Prix after that and went back to #1 in the world. And so we've had a good run with, Barb Honchak was a female world champ, Jeremy Horns, guys like that. So a lot of fun years and a lot of intensity. You can only live that intensely for so long, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Matt Hughes, probably one of my favorite all-time fighters. I loved when he came on the scene, because it just seemed to me that things really shifted and changed a lot in his era. And I loved his wrestling ability. I loved his ground and pound. I loved just everything about him. I had a chance to meet him when he was working with our group when I worked for Martial Arts Industry Association. He was working with Cage Fitness, and got a chance to meet him a couple times. Really, really cool, down to earth guy, and really appreciated that time with him.
Yeah. And and that's the thing is what a lot of people don't understand, and this is what I'm doing now, is with everything from human health to soil health, because we're dealing with several decades now of petroleum-based fertilizers, synthetic chemicals, the herbicides, the pesticides. It's causing massive problems for human health. It's causing obesity. It's causing, all these synthetic chemicals are in our water. We've got levels of atrazine in our drinking water here in Iowa that are higher than the levels that were used for tests with lab male frogs and male rats, where they exposed them to atrazine, which is a herbicide, and it not only destroyed their testosterone, but they actually grew female genitalia. So we've got severe problems. When we look at the feminization of boys and men in this nation, it is due to the synthetic chemicals trapped in their cells and cellular and mitochondrial dysfunction. So I focus a lot on, because over 30 years ago, I healed myself from my respiratory disease, and recognized the doctors didn't know what they were doing. Now there's a lot of qualified, very, very smart doctors out there, but they've become trapped in a system of control where they can only do so many things. They're only allowed to do so many things. Mm-hmm. And so what I focus on is helping people understand how to clean the cells out, create proper cellular and mitochondrial function, reset their gut bacteria, and then everything kind of turns around generally for their health. So, I expose people to high-level antioxidants, and they'll use fancy words like antioxidant, which is just concentrated, highly nutrient-rich organic substances that have the ability to go into the cell and chelate heavy metals and toxins out of it, raise oxygen levels a lot, to say the least, and to feed your mitochondria the fuel that they're supposed to have to generate energy within the cell. And without this, you're never going to be world class. You're never going to be the next level athlete. Some people genetically, when it comes to genetics, when they tell you, hey, did your mom or dad have heart problems or cancer? That's not the issue. The genetic issue that we've observed anyway is that there's certain people who genetically are not able to clean their cells out on their own. Okay. And some people are, genetically have a propensity to be able to do that a little bit better. But for the most part, we're pounded with synthetic chemicals and heavy metals so much in our environment that we see the massive explosion that correlates right next to it. There are parallel lines on a graph that go up with the amounts of synthetic chemicals and heavy metals that are in our environment. And, I observed autistic boys being brought to me in the 90s to my kids' classes. And I'm not the kind of guy that just observes somebody that's got a health problem. I ask why. I started asking why. So I started doing research and figuring out what was going on. And, we've got a lot of different ways that our bodies can have heavy metals and synthetic chemicals into them. And so it's not just the food and the water and the air, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So then what a lot of poor, unsuspecting people do is they, because they're very ill, and understand that there is no such thing as disease. There's just merely different manifestations of inflammation. So for instance, I can't have respiratory disease without inflammation. I can't have arterial disease without inflammation. I can't have high blood pressure without inflammation. I can't have arthritis without inflammation. So it all manifests in different ways. Then people go to so-called experts and they write them a piece of paper that they can go fill a pill bottle full of more synthetic chemicals. So it makes zero sense, no sense at all. So once we can educate people how to take care of themselves and how to heal themselves, because we don't heal anybody. Once they get the knowledge themselves, then it's up to them to take that road if they want to or not. And so that's what I've been doing for over 30 years.
Yeah. So how you mentioned that you had students that would come to you and you would look at why, right? You talked about having, students with autism and other things. When did you really kind of get serious about this? Because this is really your mission now. When did you really start getting educated, and how did you get educated, and what was the start of all of that?
Well, I mean, again, the start of all that was healing myself,
Right.
doing an awful lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of talking to homeopathic doctors who were the real experts in terms of human health and performance. And again, human health and human performance are literally exactly the same. What's going to make you perform better as an athlete is the same thing that will help someone get healthy and overcome, physical ailments and obstacles. So just over 3 decades of research and testing and things like that, even with my own team, we were known for having endurance that, if you got into the second and third round with us and fourth round and fifth round, you were in trouble because we were going to stand on the gas pedal that much more because we were using, and I was having my athletes and educating my athletes back then about antioxidants and raising oxygen levels. So for instance, if your muscles run out of oxygen at a cellular level, they'll start to burn sugar for energy. And the byproduct of burnt sugar in your muscles is, of course, lactic acid, fatigue, soreness, not being able to come back the next day and hit it as hard. Mm-hmm. But if you don't run out of oxygen and you can go like a psychopath for 2 hours straight and you wake up the next morning and you don't even feel it, you're not sore at all, well, you're going to be able to do that and do it even harder the next day because you continue to get more better endurance and can take the pounding and come back from it that much better. And people, I told my entire team, on a continuous basis. In no way, shape, or form will you ever tell anyone the products that we're using or the substances that we use. They're not allowed. They're not allowed to be privy to that information. And so I always kept that stuff secret until, I don't have any athletes anymore in terms of, the UFC and things like that. So now I can openly talk about how to help people, get better athletic performance.
Right. So you're not training any fighters. You're not working a team any longer.
No, I haven't for years. I reached all my goals as a coach and an athlete, and decided that because at one time I was, I had affiliate schools, I had my gyms, I was working broadcasting for Showtime Sports, ESPN, and Mark Cuban's Access TV. I was training law enforcement and military, doing those courses, and it just became too much. So I reached all my goals as a coach and decided that I was going to walk away from that and focus on other things so I could spend time with my kids.
Good for you. And what would you say it was the pinnacle in your personal career?
In terms of fighting?
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, it seems like another lifetime, to be honest with you. I just take all that in as water under the bridge and experience. But I think winning the UFC tournament was, a moment realized that I had, worked for.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say as a coach was the pinnacle for you? What was, one of the proudest moments?
I think just seeing other people succeed, to be honest with you, being a part of helping other guys succeed and other women win titles or change their lives for the better, just because they had gone through the experience.
Mm-hmm. What was your best advice for fighters when they were getting ready for a fight?
Really, I mean, it was always about, for me anyway, and I tried to instill this in people, is that, great offensive skills, win fight of the night, but great defensive skills win world titles. It's not, to me, it never was about going out and putting on a show for the crowd. I wasn't interested in that. I wasn't interested in becoming the guy that I am now in my 50s and not being able to spell my own name. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about my health after the fact, because I knew I was going to have to live life, after the cage.
Yeah. What were some of your biggest challenges working in or for the UFC or with fighters in general? What were some of the biggest struggles you had?
To be honest with you, probably my biggest struggle was just dealing with, personalities. You've got to be able to read personalities, and that's something that I guess I did fairly well. Some guys need to be yelled at, some guys need to be hugged, given the different circumstances, things like that, reading people, where they were at, all that sort of stuff. But it was more, I guess, to be honest with you, dealing with Dana White. Dana White's not an easy guy to get along with. When Lee Murray beat up Tito Ortiz in the alley in London, I, of course, trained Lee Murray. And Tito then went back to the United States after he got knocked out by Lee Murray in the alley and lied to Dana and told him that my team and Lee Murray and all of his friends jumped him and his guys when it was just a one-on-one Lee Murray knocked him out thing. That's when the troubles with Dana started. Dana took his word for it instead of mine and cut one of my athletes from the UFC for being there. And so we had a few. Well, we had about 10 years of not really getting along. Let's put it that way.
All right. Now, you were involved with the Ultimate Fighter show?
That's another thing that came up. I was doing a movie, a Paul Walker film in Mexico, and the director of the movie was also friends with Dana. Dana called his cell phone while we were standing in the desert getting ready to shoot a scene. And the director's name was John Hirschfeld. John Hirschfeld handed me the phone and said, somebody wants to talk to you. And it was Dana. And he said, hey, I was wondering if you'd be a coach on the Tough Show, the Ultimate Fighter. I was a little surprised because we were not getting along at that time. And so we ended up talking. I agreed. And then the director of the movie started telling everybody on the set, hey, Pat's going to be the next coach of the Ultimate Fighter. Paul Walker, Lawrence Fishburne, the Carradine brothers, a bunch of different people. And some of my fighters were actually in that movie with me as well. So that night Matt Hughes was fighting Joe Riggs. And so they found a Mexican golf course, the country club, allowed us to come there, and they got the pay-per-view, and we were watching the fights, and Dana got in the cage and said, I want to announce the fighters for the next Ultimate Fighter. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. He's going to announce it now. And he announces Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock. And everybody looks at me and goes, wow, what's up with that? So he blindsided me. So it was he decided to change his mind last minute because he and Tito started getting along again or something, I guess is the way it went down. And so when I got back from the movie several weeks later, I called his office and told his assistant, I said, if your boss has any guts, tell him to give me a call. And so Dana called me yelling and screaming and all that. And I go, dude, what is wrong with you? What in your brain tells you that what you do is okay, the way you treat people and the way you do these things? And ended up that it really blew up at that point between us. And then I cornered Matt Hughes against Hoist Gracie in LA. And after the fight, I was in the tunnel underneath the stadium. And Dana comes up to me and says, he goes, I can't believe you actually show up at UFCs. I can't believe you actually have the guts to show up here. And I said to him, I go, actually, I came to beat the hell out of you. And he looked at me like, oh. So after that, all the UFCs, he had a bodyguard because he thought I was actually going to beat him up.
Wow. Story time is good. Story time is good. Well, listen, what was that fight like for you as a coach? Because, Hoist Gracie being the first ever, right, in UFC 1, and he was the deal. And then Matt Hughes comes in and beats him. Do you think that was kind of was that a time where there was a changing of the guard, or was that way past Hoist Gracie's time? Or, what are your thoughts going into that fight and, after the result of the fight?
Well, it was just completely different levels of athleticism, number one. And you've got a guy who's, a 4-time All-American Division I wrestler who, knows how to strike, knows how to stuff takedowns, knows how to, shut down jiu-jitsu, all those things. It was just a complete mismatch from the beginning, obviously. And that was apparent. And when I was learning jiu-jitsu from Sergio Montiero, who was my first jiu-jitsu coach way back in the 90s, I said to him, when Americans, learn this stuff, when we get good at this stuff, like the world's in big trouble. And, it's rang true. When you look at the Russians, the Chechens, the Dagestanis, the Americans, a lot of these people that have a wrestling background, and then you combine it with all the other stuff, you've got some pretty scary characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I remember watching that fight and just, being more of a fan, it was just, it was kind of a wow moment for a lot of people. It's like, it seemed pretty easy is how I remember it. Right. And, being a huge fan of Hoist Gracie from all those years, and then also being a fan of Matt Hughes and watching just that, it just seemed to me like that was, there's kind of a huge shift at that moment in time.
Yeah. That was when, I think again, the athleticism, that's where that shone through in the wrestling and everything else. So you put somebody with that. I mean, again, when I was in my prime, I was a pretty strong guy, and Matt's strength was, a different level. It was a different level. Guys like that grab a hold of your wrist. You don't get your arm back unless they give it back to you. So yeah, it's just different level of power.
So what's on the horizon? I know we talked a little bit about, what you've been working on for the last 30 years, but what are your immediate goals, and what do you see happening in the future for you?
I'm going to continue working. I've over the past several years have met a lot of very, very intelligent people that are fixing soil. I've got exclusive U.S. rights to substance for agriculture that, the microorganisms in it and the nutrient levels of it actually fix soil. The microorganisms actually eat heavy metals and synthetic chemicals. So you can convert and break down the nutrients in soil to make them bioavailable to plants again. And our soil here in Iowa, because of all the synthetic chemicals, and across the country, really, in agriculture, manufacturing, people putting it all over their lawns, golf courses, everything else, You know, we've literally terracultured our entire country. We've killed all the microorganisms in our soil. You know, soil is supposed to be alive with billions upon billions of microorganisms in it, with worms, with bugs, with everything else. Well, if you go into a farm field in a lot of places here in Iowa or Illinois or wherever in the Midwest, and you take a shovel in the middle of the summer and you start digging, you're not going to find any worms. You're not going to find anything. Everything's dead. And this is a severe problem. So I work mostly on the side of helping humans understand how they can get better, how they can get these synthetic chemicals and heavy metals out of their bodies and start turning around their own health. And of course, what they should be putting in their body, which shouldn't come out of boxes and doesn't need a commercial. People should be growing their own food. Instead of having a pristine grass lawn, you should actually have a garden, and you should be growing organic vegetables and fruits and, you know, all of that. And so working with guys like Jim Gale from Food Forest Abundance, he teaches people how to grow 7-layer food forests in their yards. You know, with just a small yard, you can grow enough food to feed your entire neighborhood. You know, wow. That's what people should be doing. We should not be depending on supply chains, because obviously we've seen supply chains extremely strained the past few years, and that's not going away. That's going to continue to be a problem. So people need to wake up a little bit and start growing their own healthy food, because that's how, through history, governments have controlled their people with food. So super important.
Well, listen, thank you. Thanks for being on the show and sharing all this information, sharing, you know, history on your career and the fighters that you've coached. Just appreciate your time. If you can hang out for just 60 seconds as I close out the show, to chat real quick.
Can I just tell people where to go if they want to get
yes, please.
One of the supplements that if they want to go to organicsupersoldier.com and pick up that product, and I think they'll find that, you know, overall feeling of well-being and health, you can test it for athletic performance, for endurance, and give me feedback. I'm always open to feedback, and we continue to work on different products to help people with their endurance and their health. And so, yeah, just eat healthy, take the right antioxidants to help your body stay healthy, and you'll enjoy life a lot. You know, the quality of life will be a lot better.
I love it. All right. Well, listen, again, thank you so much. Thanks for the education as well. And remind me one more time, the website is organicsoldier.com.
Organicsupersoldier.com.
Organicsupersoldier.com. All right, I'm going to check it out for sure. And again, thanks for being on. Hang out for just a couple of seconds. I'll be right back. But guys, thank you for watching today. Do me a favor, share this video, and please subscribe to Master Motivation on YouTube. And we'll see you guys for the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.